325 years of silence. That is what the Cascadia Subduction Zone has given the Pacific Northwest. Not peace, not safety, silence, the kind that accumulates like debt, piling up interest in the dark, deep beneath the ocean floor, where two of the most massive tectonic plates on this planet are locked in a slow-motion collision that will, one day, end without warning. The Juan de Fuca plate is pushing eastward at roughly 40 millimeters a year. The North American plate refuses to yield. And the result of that refusal is not stillness. It is pressure. Stored, compressed, geological pressure building across a 1,100-kilometer fault zone. An underground spring wound tighter with every passing decade, every passing year. Every passing day, you wake up in Seattle, or Portland, or Tacoma, and never feel a thing. That calm is not evidence that nothing is coming. It is the proof that something enormous already is. What the Earth remembers here is a date that should be taught in every school in the Pacific Northwest. January 26, 1700. Late that evening, something catastrophic happened beneath the ocean west of what is now Washington and Oregon. The Cascadia Fault ruptured. The Juan de Fuca plate lurched downward. The coastline of North America dropped several feet in a matter of minutes, and a wall of water, a tsunami generated by that rupture, traveled across the entire Pacific Ocean and struck the coast of Japan. We know this not because anyone in North America wrote it down. The indigenous nations of the Pacific Northwest preserved oral accounts of the shaking, and the flooding in detail extraordinary enough that modern geologists have used them to reconstruct the event's scale. And the Japanese recorded the tsunami's arrival precisely, giving scientists the exact minute the rupture occurred, nearly an ocean away. The geologic record in the soil tells the same story. Along the coast of Washington and Oregon, scientists find what are called ghost forests. Ancient trees buried upright in tidal marshes, their roots submerged when the land dropped during the quake and never came back up. The trees died standing, the ground swallowed them. The evidence of the last great rupture is literally embedded in the earth, waiting to be read. It reads as a warning. The basics of what is coming to understand why the next Cascadia rupture will be so different from anything the modern Pacific Northwest has experienced, you need to understand a single concept. Magnitude is not a linear scale. A magnitude 7, 0 earthquake is not twice as powerful as a magnitude 6, 0. It releases 32 times more energy. A magnitude 9, 0 releases roughly 1,000 times more energy than a 7, 0. That is not a typo. Scientists modeling the Cascadia Subduction Zone are not preparing for the kind of earthquake that cracks walls and topples chimneys. They are preparing for a full margin rupture, a simultaneous release of stored energy along the entire length of the fault that would shake the ground in some locations for 4 to 6 minutes, continuously, not 4 to 6 seconds, 4 to 6 minutes. That is longer than most people can conceptually process. Stand still right now and stare at a clock for 4 minutes. That is how long the shaking will last while reinforced concrete structures exceed their design tolerances. While soil in the Willamette Valley and the Puget Sound lowlands turns to liquid beneath thousands of buildings, while every unreinforced masonry structure in Portland, and there are hundreds of them, begins its collapse sequence. The shaking alone, without what follows, would be among the most destructive events in recorded American history. What follows is worse. The ocean resets. The moment the Cascadia Fault breaks, the seafloor above it will lurch upward. The displacement will be measured in meters, not centimeters, not inches, meters. That sudden vertical movement will transfer an enormous amount of energy into the water column above it, generating a series of tsunami waves that will begin traveling toward the coast at the speed of a commercial aircraft. In the deep ocean, those waves are nearly invisible, long, low swells that would barely rock a boat. But as they move into shallower water approaching the coastline, they compress. they slow down, they stack up, and they grow. For the outer coast of Washington and Oregon, the communities sitting directly on the coastline, the towns of Seaside and Cannon Beach and Westport and Ocean Shores. The window between the earthquake ending and the first wave arriving may be 15 to 30 minutes. For some locations, less. The ground will still be shaking when the water begins its retreat, the ocean pulling back in that eerie vacuum that survivors of past tsunamis have described as the sea taking a breath before it screams. The waves that return will reach estimated heights of 10 to 20 meters in some coastal areas. They will travel inland wherever the terrain allows. Coastal Highway 101 will be underwater in sections. The bridges that connect coastal communities to escape routes inland are, in many cases, built to standards that geologists and engineers quietly acknowledge will not survive the preceding earthquake. The escape routes will be gone before the water arrives. The geometry of danger inland cities, Seattle, Portland, Tacoma, Olympia, are separated from the tsunami zone by geography. The Cascades to the east, the distance from the open coast, they will not face wave inundation. What they will face is something that coastal communities largely escape. Proximity to the fault itself means stronger, longer, more sustained shaking. And beneath many of these cities lies a soil condition that transforms that shaking into something far more violent. It is called liquefaction. When saturated soil, the kind that underlies much of Seattle's waterfront, Portland's industrial districts, and Tacoma's tide flats, is subjected to sustained seismic shaking, the soil particles lose contact with one another. The ground stops behaving like a solid and starts behaving like a thick liquid. Buildings that have foundations in liquefiable soil do not simply crack or lean. They sink, they tilt. The ground they were built on effectively disappears beneath them. Seattle's soil liquefaction risk maps are not classified documents. They are publicly available. They show substantial portions of the city sitting on material that seismologists rate as highly susceptible. The port facilities, the industrial waterfront, the areas built on filled land. These are places where the earthquake itself, before any secondary effects, before any tsunami, before any fire, will cause structural damage on a scale that the city's emergency management plans describe with unusual bluntness as catastrophic. The minutes that follow. The cascade of failures that begins when the Cascadia fault ruptures will not respect category boundaries. It will be simultaneous and interconnected, which is precisely what makes it so different from the disasters modern emergency response systems are designed to handle. Power goes out region-wide in the first seconds. Backup generators at hospitals begin their fuel consumption timers. Cell networks, already overwhelmed the moment the shaking starts, collapse under the load of millions of simultaneous calls. The natural gas distribution system, built on infrastructure that crosses numerous fault lines and liquefaction zones, begins failing in ways that will take weeks to fully assess, let alone repair. The water system follows a similar trajectory. Puget Sound area water utilities have conducted their own assessments. The pipelines that deliver water across the region traverse exactly the kind of soil and terrain that will be most disrupted. Firefighting, which will be desperately needed as gas leaks ignite and infrastructure damage sparks fires across the urban landscape, will be conducted in a region where the hydrant system cannot be assumed to be functional. FEMA's planning documents have studied this convergence of failures in detail. The agency has estimated that in the weeks following a full Cascadia rupture, up to 1 million people in the affected region could be displaced from their homes. The number of people requiring search and rescue, trapped in collapsed structures, cut off by infrastructure damage, unable to self-evacuate, has been estimated in the tens of thousands. The highway system that emergency resources would use to reach the affected region runs through mountain passes and over bridges that face the same seismic vulnerabilities as everything else. The logistics of a response operation at this scale, in this terrain, with this level of simultaneous damage, represents a challenge that emergency management professionals describe as unlike anything the continental United States has faced in the modern era. Why this hasn't changed everything. There is a version of this story that ends with sweeping preparedness reforms, retrofitted buildings, updated codes, community-wide evacuation drills. In isolated pockets, that version exists. Oregon and Washington have both enacted seismic retrofit programs. Some coastal communities have built vertical evacuation structures. Towers designed to give residents somewhere to go when there is no time to run. A handful of schools in the tsunami inundation zone have been rebuilt on higher ground. But the scale of what has been done is not matched to the scale of what is coming. The reason is not ignorance. The scientists have been clear for decades. The reason is the same force that makes all long-horizon catastrophe preparation difficult. The human mind is not well calibrated for risks that are certain but unscheduled. When the threat is, this will happen, we just don't know if it's in 2 years or 200, the urgency that drives action tends to dissipate. The Cascadia Subduction Zone has ruptured at irregular intervals throughout geologic history. The recurrence period is not a precise clock. The pressure building in the fault right now could be released in a magnitude 8.0 partial rupture. It could accumulate further and release in a magnitude 9.2 or higher full margin event, or some combination of the two. What the geological record will not tell you is when. What it has already told you, in buried ghost forests, and Japanese tsunami records and soil samples pulled from coastal marshes across 5 centuries, is that it will. What the silence is telling you. The Pacific Northwest sits in a window of geological time that has no clear end date. The last 325 years of quiet are not an indicator of what the next year will bring, or the next decade. They are simply the interval between the last rupture and the next one. An interval that, by every measure seismologists have available, is already longer than typical. The fault is not stable. It is locked. And there is a significant difference between the two. Stable means the stress has been relieved. Locked means it is accumulating. The communities of the Pacific Northwest, the 4 million people in the coastal and near-coastal zones, the millions more in Seattle and Portland and Tacoma, are not living on stable ground. They are living on a geological bank account that has been in deficit for 3 centuries, accruing interest in silence, in darkness, in a place no one can see or measure or touch. The next payment will not come in the form of a warning. It will not come gradually. It will come as approximately 4 minutes of the most violent shaking this continent has produced in recorded history, followed by the ocean-filling spaces where streets used to be. Followed by weeks of a fractured landscape trying to piece itself back together without the infrastructure it relied on to function. The Cascadia Subduction Zone does not need your attention to operate. But the people living above it, right now, today, sleeping in buildings designed for a world that doesn't fully account for what's beneath them, might need yours.